Blog Talk Radio.
Well, hello and welcome to Blog Talk Radio. I'm Ernie Jacob, and today Michael Linton and I are joined by Michel Bauwens. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Is it Bauwens?
Well, yes, Bauwens is a Flemish Dutch name, so that's the right pronunciation. And Michel is my research. I live in Thailand, but I have the Belgian nationality, and I have kind of a dual culture, which is the French-speaking culture of my mother and the Dutch-Flemish-speaking culture of my father.
Mm-hmm.
But the name is a Flemish name, and Michel is a French first name. I often use Michael because in English it's often assumed to be a female name.
Mm-hmm.
So I get all my male wrong.
Well, let's call you Michel for today because we're in an international context. In fact, we're speaking globally to each other. But anybody can listen. There could be, at this moment, many people just logged into this site and listening. Equally, there can be people who will come along later today, later tomorrow, or sometime in the next 3 months or years and listen with avid interest to our discussions, which will, of course, by then be transcribed and thoroughly cross-linked, and everybody will live happily ever after. But for today, well, Michel, you've been raising a few questions about the monetary relations, the issues that the P2P Foundation and the P2P movement, or what would you call yourself? A movement? An idea set? What are
I would say a kind of an internetwork would be probably the best way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to, I'll just kind of shortly describe what we aim to do, what I aim to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the P2P Foundation is a initiative that aims to study, research, and promote peer-to-peer alternatives in every domain of activity that humans can engage in.
Mm-hmm.
Peer-to-peer for me is any dynamic whereby individuals can freely engage into actions and relationships with other people in order to create common value.
Mm-hmm.
So the important thing is you need a distributed network, end-to-end, point-to-point,
mm-hmm.
where the individual can, without permission, aggregate with other people with whom they share values.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I think what happens, since we have the internet and the web, is that the cost of globally coordinating small teams has become so low and is becoming so efficient that what I call peer production is becoming competitive with both, hierarchical, centralized, maybe state approaches, but also what I would call decentralized corporate approaches.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we have distributed approaches that kind of start within civil society that do not necessarily have to have a formal organization. They can, but they don't necessarily have to.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have peer production, which is the ability to produce in common. We
mm-hmm.
have peer governance, which is the ability to manage those processes. And we have peer property, which is the ability to protect the common value from private appropriation. And if you would look at those three processes, they're characterized more or less by open and free input.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have open content, open education, open textbooks, free software, etc. Because if you want to cooperate without permission, well, you need some kind of raw material, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this raw material has to be available for the cooperation to occur. So we need open and free raw material. once you start working, we have participatory processes, because if I voluntarily engage with you in a voluntary project and you're not paying me, well, where's your power? So that means that in terms of governance, you cannot really coerce me into doing anything. So we need to find some kind of consensus in order to advance our project. And then it's also participatory, because the design of peer-to-peer projects is it's designed for inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
All the control, the quality control, the control for excellence is no longer put in front. In other words, give me your degree before you can work with me. It would always be after.
Yeah.
First you produce the code, and then we'll see if the code is good.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't tell you what code to make. And the last
you don't?
point, and then
Why don't you say what you want?
Yes, I can say what I want, but it's like a wish. It's, I can express my intent.
I see. Yeah, you cannot
I
coerce.
cannot say yes. So it's not a role-oriented or a job-oriented mode of production. It's a task-oriented mode, whereby people choose a task that they like to do and that they think they can do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the project finds ways to kind of distill out of this larger pool of contributions what really works and what has quality. And finally, and then, this is the end of my introduction, you need a commons-oriented output. Yeah, you're not going to volunteer in a common project if I can say, well, what you're doing is mine and not yours anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So you need some kind of guarantee that what you make together also is universally available for everybody to continue to work on. And then you will recognize that commons-oriented output means the end of the cycle, but also means the beginning of the new cycle, because commons-oriented output is open and free input.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how peer production kind of reproduces itself.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. It's the standard frame, of an ethically organized community of this sort of nature. I noticed one of the things that Ernie dug up for me was a bunch of quotes from various parts of the site, and he has a fairly lengthy quotation that covers most of this, about equipotency as well.
Equipotentiality, right?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Very important concept that there is not a hierarchy of control, authority, power. But then, of course, that does introduce the question of, well, if there is no such hierarchy, then what is our purpose? What is our process? What is our management, governance, and so on and so forth? And definitely different. Definitely has to be different.
Yes, I want to say something about equipotentiality, which is, the old way of deciding things is I will judge you as a person as a whole, right? And I will look at your degree and say, well, you can do this or you cannot do this. If you don't have a degree, you don't play.
Mm-hmm.
In peer-to-peer projects, we consider people to be a collection of skills and experiences that cannot be deduced from any formal degree.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can have a very particular experience that is just what we need to solve a particular problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't say that in advance. Now, those things, of course, always existed, but it's just we couldn't find them because it was too expensive to do. The kind of coordination and transaction costs to be able to find that gem in that person just wasn't cost effective.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what has changed today. So today we can have an equipotential approach and say, well, within all these tasks that need to be done to create this common value, I'm pretty sure that there is something that appeals to you, that makes you passionate about doing it, and also where you have the skill for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of just basic assumption of equipotential cooperation. And a second remark, because you mentioned hierarchy, I would not say there's no hierarchy in peer-to-peer, but I would say that the role of a hierarchy is different. It's a hierarchy of engagement. It's a hierarchy of service.
Mm-hmm.
Because to get these things going, and I'm pretty sure you know that yourself with your own projects, you need committed people to drive it. First of all, you need a vision. You need a certain amount of charisma to attract people to that vision.
Mm-hmm.
And you need some kind of expertise, and it's through your engagement and your expertise that you gain trust and reputation and some kind of influence within the project. But it's tempered by the fact that people can always leave or fork. So in other words, any influence and any hierarchy that exists is kind of balanced by what some people have called exit-based empowerment.
Mm-hmm. Walk. Yeah.
You can walk.
Mm-hmm.
You can walk, or because the source code is open, you can say, well, from now on, we'll fork it and we go our own way.
Yeah, fork it all, I say. When in doubt. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of my father's lines. He said, if you come to a fork in the road, take it. Yeah, I think diversity is critical, and the problem with hierarchical organizations and command and control structures, it tends to be a limitation of purpose. There isn't the flexibility and the variety and the fruitfulness that we get from the interactive. I'm sure you've seen that BioTeams site. I just put up bioteams.net on our conversation chat, and of course Robin Good is part of their network in many ways. So you've probably come across this site already.
Seen it quite a while ago, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for us. This is pretty much the simplest and most broadly accessible description of the working process that we see underneath, around, and parallel to the command and control model that's presumed to be the be-all and end-all of our society and our economy. Yes. Were it not for these other strata of interactivity, nothing would actually get done. I like the BioTeams model in that it identifies the individual as an individual, busily doing what they feel most appropriate with a certain degree of connectivity with everybody else, but not bloody meetings. It's not we should all march in step. It's we shall work independently and interactively and with a degree of responsibility and recognition of each other and so on. Well, that's always been the basis of what would I call group activity in the let system open money world since the early 80s when we began this. We were very clear that there was a distinction between I've got the cash and you're poor, so I can get you to jump. The command and control capacity of conventional money, when people are dependent upon it, means they've got to do what they've got to do to get paid. So the person with the money calls the tune. In English we say, who pays the piper calls the tune. That is the man who's...
Right.
Yeah. Well, the difference with a let system context is that you can never command anybody with the money, because if they don't want to do what you're inviting them to participate in, be it a collaborative venture or quite simply, will you mow my lawn, will you look after my kids this evening or something, nobody is compelled by their monetary situation to say, yes, I will. They do have to recognize that if they don't respond to people's requests for service at some stage, their reputation is shot. But the fundamental rule of the let system is the freedom to say no. I don't like what you're asking me to do, and I'm not going to do it. Why not? Mm-hmm. Because it's Tuesday. Because anything. It's just I make my choice, and I got to live with the consequences of that choice. But we're in a currency model where the coercion is gone, and we're into consent and community as the dominant modality for people's interaction.
I'd like to play, a little bit advocate of the devil, just to make sure that I get this right. Okay, if I look at peer production and compare it with, the LED system, so you start from voluntary cooperation, okay, and the reason you can do that is that because somehow you have some means of survival. Wherever that comes from. You can be a student, you can be a researcher, maybe you have a good job, but you have time on your hands. Maybe in the case of Linux, it becomes so successful that a big company like IBM decides to pay 2,000 people to do it. But somehow you need to have some kind of income that gives you the freedom to participate. But that income cannot be a conditional income, right? Because if it's conditional, then you're not in free cooperation. Then you have to do it to get the money. So, I want to be clear that the reason it's non-coercive is that you have somehow
handled the coercion in another place. Basically, the coercion is on another side of the book.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's an ideal situation, of course, where everybody who's engaged in a project has that degree of independence. I think it's a fairly pure situation to achieve. I think there's a lot of situations where there's a conditional. For instance, inside the open money development proposals, we generally say, okay, Joe could work with us on the software or the graphics or the promotions or whatever. But she needs $1,000 a month to be able to step outside the coercive job by the day style. But just if we can find $1,000 for her, then she can be fully committed inside this project. And now the coercion then is a negotiated situation, if you like, coercion, the conditionality. She says, look, I'm sorry, I'd love to be able to do this for nothing, but I'm not independently wealthy, and my employer isn't giving me 10 hours a day to do this sort of thing. So if I'm to do it, I need to be able to pay my rents or manage this much income. I need 1,000. Somebody else might need 700. Somebody else might need 3,000 to be able to be fully engaged. More typically, people will want, say, sort of 500 so that they can accommodate maybe 20 hours a week of their work that they can put this way. So we see it as a sort of what can you do if you have what support, so the discussion. Now, because we can have those discussions inside an open money context, the process of the discussion is a little different than it might be inside a hard money, exclusive hard money deal. And I think that's the area we would be best to look at. Your description of P2P, for instance, takes it without reference to the monetary models that are engaged in the discussion, the financing of it, the distribution of its product. Perhaps the place to look at this is, well, what sort of P2P money do you guys need? What sort of open money would work for P2P projects?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, I want to maybe explain one thing I've observed about how the role of money comes in peer production, which is if you look at a successful peer production projects like Linux. So what you get is originally it was 100% voluntary engagement by people who were not paid to do the job, right? Mm-hmm. And then at some point you create a commons which becomes valuable enough so that it will create an ecology of businesses around it, mm-hmm. which kind of profit from the commons. Now, then the thing is, and this is very important, you can't apply profit sharing or revenue sharing, because if you do that, you're in a market, and that's not peer production.
Hold on. A market is not peer production.
No, because in peer production, what you create is immaterial value, software, content, open designs, which are universally available, so there's no tension between supply and demand.
So a peer-to-peer couldn't create a field of tomatoes, field of potatoes. You couldn't have a peer-to-peer tomato field.
What you can do, the difference is the following. You can exchange the knowledge about the tomatoes, between farmers on a worldwide scale, and create a peer production of tomato knowledge that wouldn't require, a heavy investment, because, the intellectual cooperation does not require a heavy investment except, in general infrastructure, of access to networks, right? But once you start making tomatoes, that's my view, then you have to make rival, you are in a rival production of rival goods, and you need cost recovery mechanisms.
Yes, but why does that mean that your organization cannot be peer-to-peer?
Well, I make a difference between cooperative production and peer production. Sounds funny, but in peer production, I'm voluntarily engaging to create common value which is accessible to everybody. But if I screw up the tomatoes, my community will, my cooperative community will not laugh with it. Mm-hmm. So it's a different situation. And the whole difficulty for me is how you interplay, the production of rival goods, physical goods needing cost recovery, with the free production of immaterial goods through peer production.
Well, I'm willing to leave the issue of the free production of immaterial goods as sort of an end stop on the spectrum. That's out on the wing, if you like. Mm-hmm. And yep, I know that happens, and I know it's very effective, and there's no confusion about money or restricted products or whatever. However, that's an interesting area, but it's not my primary interest. My primary interest is in the world where people eat, shop, work, build, repair, serve each other, haircuts, restaurants. That's the world that I want to see achieving, not potentially your equipotency, but a much higher degree of
cooperation,
conviviality, compatibility, consensuality, lack of coercion. That's the world that we're looking at, where yes, there are products and there is a limitation. This person can only serve one person at a time, and it takes half an hour each time, so they have 15 slots a day that they can manage. So there's a limitation. Now, by what process are those 15 appointments priorized? Who gets to see the teacher, the music teacher, or the dentist, or whatever? And that seems to me to have certain components of market inevitably put into it.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, because you're in the sphere of rival goods, right. And therefore you need some kind of mechanism to decide where that thing goes, because if it goes to you, it doesn't go to me. Right.
Now, at the moment, our primary mode for discerning that is the hard cash money. And so it's definitely embedded in a power hierarchy and an either or, me before you sort of world. Our proposition is that if communities, societies, groups are using open money models, using closed-loop currencies, using sort of venture accounting networks, like who put how much into this project, and therefore how do we decide on the ethical distribution of its consequences. Those are areas where we are dealing with the interface between the monetary model and the social process, because that's the only area we're interested in fundamentally. It's not to say we're not interested in social processes, but what we are interested in is the leverage point that we can be effective. And for our last 20-something years, we've been trying to be effective at introducing people to a money that is not coercive, a money that is collaborative. And it comes in many shapes and sizes.
Okay, so this is where I want to challenge you, Michael.
Please
because,
challenge.
I want to make sure that I understand that, because, okay, I need money to survive.
What money?
Usually, well, either normal cash or some kind of alternative open money, right? But if you need it to survive, then inevitably there's some kind of coercion involved, I think. So you have to explain to me, why if I participate in a LEDs, I mean, I still need to eat and have a roof over my head. What's the aspect that is different in your proposal that that differs from classic money?
A range of choice. With classic money, you get a limited choice because there's a very strong power base. The rich have it, the poor don't. It will always be that way. That's a function of its structure. It's a Pareto effect. The more you have, the less I do. And if we've structured a society on the basis that having more is the primary value, more housing, more money, more stocks and bonds, more, then there is absolutely no limit to how far up the chain people want to go. And so their aspirations up create deprivation at the other end. Now, those who are deprived, then to put food on the table, 98% of their opportunities are in the conventional economy, and therefore they are coerced into that in order to keep the game going. Now, all that happens when you have substantial community currencies around is that the protagonist has choices, more choices. I'm not saying that they can live without food. I'm not saying that they can sort of sit back and say, well, God will provide and I'm on a pension or whatever and I have no need to care about anything. Therefore, my choices can be entirely independent of concerns about food, shelter, my time allocation, my social responsibility.
Right, but you could have a basic income. Theoretically, you could have a kind of basic income that at least would guarantee your survival and give you a lot more freedom in choosing your jobs.
Well, and this is indeed one of we think that carbon costing, and here I'm looking at the sort of model of trading personal quotas of carbon. I'm not talking about the government selling carbon deals to each other and the major corporations. I think that's a complete boondoggle. But the tradable emission quotas concept, TEQS.net, that one is the proposition that everybody in each nation should have perhaps a weekly allocation of energy units. Now, obviously, some people would need a lot of these energy units and other people would need very few. And so you have a secondary market that would enable a lot of people in our world to have a guaranteed annual income based simply upon their energy, how they manage their energy requirements and have surplus to sell. Now, I'd love to see a guaranteed annual income that totally freed up all sorts of choice points right the way through society. We're not there yet, and it's going to take several years at least of very well organized negotiations to get to the point where even a few countries have that sort of affair. What about the meantime? What are we going to do next week? Because we're not going to find everybody's socially supported, and not everybody has the annual income that allows them the freedom of choice. So as an interim level, further currencies that increase their choice factor, particularly to the place where, because they have monetary creation, anybody in a Let's model can go negative, can issue money. So they can buy things without having to do the job that that particular person is demanding of them. And that freedom to say no and freedom to live despite turning down a particular job offer of some nature is much more available in community currencies than without them. That's the basis of our premise. We can't go further than that. But we can say, open this door, it leads to more freedom.
Okay, so to get it right, so in a Let's system, I can create my own money.
Yeah. Open money is the ability, the sovereign right of the individual to create their own promises.
Right. How closely is open money linked to the Let's system?
Well, that's like saying how closely is the game of poker linked to a deck of cards. There's a one-to-one relationship between the games you can play and the structure of the card style. You know, tarot cards, you can't play poker with them very well. But normal 4 suits, 13 values, 52 cards, that's the platform. On the platform, you can play poker, you can play bridge, you can play all sorts of games. Well, on the open money platform, you can play any currency system that's basically configured and available. At this point, it's very limited. We've got mutual credit currencies, and the way in which a group would implement a specific implementation would be to form social agreements that governed how their currency worked. So, for instance, somebody might say, we're going to have a mutual credit currency that measures in time, so that my time is equal to your time. That would be a time bank style of mutual credit. They could have one that says we're going to measure in conventional legal tender, so the euros in Europe, the dollar in the States, or somewhere like that. And they could say that there will be credit limits, or there will be an interest charge, or there will be a demurrage system associated with it. You can make up whatever rules you like around one of these networks. The Let's system is a very specific set of understandings and agreements. It's based upon, there's lots of information about the Let's system, particularly on the design manual page on the gmletsunet.com site. Maybe I can type that up when I get my fingers clear. But fundamentally, the Let's system says you measure in the legal tender. Nobody is in charge. There are no interest charges levied on people's accounts because every transaction is by the individual. It's a matter of choice on his part. I think that's about it, isn't it, Arnie? What's it? No interest charges. Nobody's in charge but you. Therefore, no credit limits imposed by the institution.
That's like kind of the constitution of Let's.
Yeah, that's the declared parameters. So Let's system is just one game within the field of all the games you can play with that deck of cards. And
what about the open money? So open money is larger than Let's. Is that what you're saying? So
yeah, open money. Well, in fact, there's 3 layers here, Michel. Open money is mere philosophical concept. Mere, like maybe gravity is merely a physical, philosophical concept. You don't have to agree with gravity to be available to it. Nobody can box gravity up and sell it to you and take it away. It exists in the context because it exists. Now, open money essentially is the right for me to say to you, I can't pay you any cash, Michel, but I can give you some of my time in in the future. And you can come back to me and get the value, or you can use my time credits with Ernie. How about that? It's basically the ability to make promises and pass them on. Now, we see that as basically the social context of our world, overtly in most of the Western world, perhaps more covert in some political regimes and contexts, but basically we are enabled and entitled to make those sort of transferable promises to each other. That's what open money is. It's just, that context exists. Now, a context is one thing. However, a platform that makes it feasible is another. And if you take the analysis of Linux, well, it was a concept first. Let's have a operating system working on a PC that uses the Unix platform. Then it became a substantial reality because somebody did the coding, worked it out, put it all together, and we had it. Well, open money is the concept. The platform that enables systems to be implemented in an accessible and a tangible way. Well, Jeff Cheshire and Eric Harris-Braun and also Hugh Bernard in London have written multi-currency open systems to different levels of finesse and finish and detail. But all of them allow the protagonists who can connect to the internet, either directly or through a proxy. Like we could have a village working entirely through one person having a cell phone. These programs enable the propagation of networks of currencies within which the people who form those networks decide how they're going to be operating. At this stage, it's mainly decided in the social context because the software itself hasn't been refined sufficiently, as it will be, to introduce the thousands of varieties as pull-down menus. You want a currency that does this, you want a currency for that, you want a procedure that supports this sort of social network. Well, those should all be, and will all be, off the peg. And it'll also be capable.
I want to ask you another question. Let's assume that, I have here in Chiang Mai a local currency that allows me to, buy food, pay my rent, doing different things. And then I move, I go on holiday somewhere else.
Well, your local money is no use to you out in another place. Your local money is your contract with the local community.
So what happens to the kind of, need for interoperability and the need, to have some kind of universal money system that you can use everywhere?
Well, that's part of this hierarchical legacy we have in our minds, the idea that there must be some sort of an integration that pulls these different things together. The flat network model says you don't have to put things together, you just have another network. That if you want to be engaged in international transactions, inter-community trading, be it for hard goods or immaterial goods, then the idea is not to link your local currency to my local currency through a hierarchical exchange mechanism where there are special drawing rights and exchange rates and all that nonsense. That's all appropriate in the hard money world. It's inevitable in the hard money world. It is unavoidable. But in the soft money world of created flat networks, when you want to trade in another community than the ones you're already participating in, and I'd say it's plural. You said you have one currency in your local town that's meeting your needs. I'd say if it's meeting your needs in your local town, you've probably got 5 or 6 currencies, not one. One currency is a disaster. It's like trying to ride a motorcycle so that you can do that before you ride a bicycle, before you ride a tricycle. It's wrong. It's the wrong way up. And people just don't get this. And 99% of the community currency development has been stuck with people trying to create the perfect currency so that everybody will do it and then we'll be off. Well, we won't be able to do the currency any more than we can do the music or the art. How many forms can there be? But having the variety is what makes it variable. So you have varieties inside your locality, you have varieties regionally, you have varieties globally. So you want to trade with somebody in Sydney, Australia, you link into them and you negotiate with them, okay, we'll do this on the Pacific organic net or something, if it's about organic food shipping across the Pacific. You have a currency for the function.
All right, I have another question, which is the following. Let's assume you're the grand strategist of open money. You're the Lenin of the open money party.
I'd rather be Trotsky myself.
And you're thinking about how will we bring this about? So how would you say, what is the status of this? How much of it is ideal? How much of it is already done? And when will you know that we're there? And how do you achieve that?
Well, I think you're always there as long as you say you're there, and it's real for you, and you'll never be there until it is. That's a sort of philosophical solipsism, but the open money as a technical service, we've got a rudimentary package, and working with Jeff right now on some sort of final refinements to put out what I call the alpha level, maybe. I don't know what Jeff might feel. It's not even alpha. He might feel that it's beta. I don't know. But certainly there's some very lightweight but profound software that we've been using and playing with. We're about to release another level of it in a few weeks, I hope. Now that would constitute another shift. But it's only a shift in the availability. It's not a shift in the action that's taking place. I remember in our chats on the P2P Foundation on Ning, you made the comment about the internal logic of these systems, and my response was that I like logic, but I'd rather see action. People are not moved by logic. They may be enabled by it, but they only actually do something when they get on and do it. So the implementation of these currency systems, rather than their theorization or their fantasy, is the next level. And then there's two directions really to look at there. One of them would be you have a community, like the P2P network that you're active in, or your physical neighborhood. Can we empower that neighborhood with currency models? And that, I'd say, is from the grassroots up. It's the diversity in the context. But there's also the necessity to finance the development process. That is, to make it possible for people like Jeff, like Ernie and I, to put substantial time into this game without being penalized or just incapacitated. And that means a form of development that has the capacity to create a revenue stream which can be ethically handled by the creators of that stream to maintain and develop their open money projects in their region, their nation, their sector of the world. Now that is, again, is a model we've propounded since the mid-'80s, and we've had several attempts to start off such what I call endogenous self-fueling networks in several cities in the world in the 80s, 90s, and more recently in Japan in 2001. And then I was in London for a few years recently and trying to get people to play there, and we have been unsuccessful. I cannot understand why people don't see what we're offering and take it up. There's no good asking me why it's not being done, because I think it should be done. It's available and it's right there. And I can't. It makes no logical sense to me that people are not doing it, apart from the usual problems of paradigm shift. People can't see what's there. But we have considerable hope that the formulation of community way initiatives, which is models that are built upon the creation of common good in the community through the use of community currencies and the diversion of some 10% of that created common wealth to the development project. Oh, connection was lost. I see. I'm gonna reconnect Michel to this. We've dropped him. This will take just a second. If I can find my keys, here we go. We'll just try.
How long ago did we?
Yeah, I wonder.
Because he has been quiet for some time.
Yes, well, that's because I talk so much. Nobody gets a word in when I'm talking. Michel, you're back. When did we lose you?
I don't know. This is
yeah.
still not quite totally the first world.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Well, what was I sort of talking about when you lost connection? Where had I got to?
I was really asking about the status of open money. How far do you feel that you've made progress on actually implementing this in the real world?
And I won't recap because it's all on tape, and anybody else can pick it up. Even you later, you can go back to minute 33 or something and start again. Basically, we're on the edge. We've got something that's close to that sort of pre-crystallization scene. Sheldrake's work on morphological fields and how, first of all, it's not happening and then suddenly it's happening everywhere. I think we're on the edge of that. I think we have an opportunity which is sort of equivalent to what Napster achieved in the opening of P2P file exchange systems. Now, with all the limitations of Napster, the fact is it broke through a condition and opened up possibilities that led to many other more effective peer-to-peer systems, demonstrated the validity in a way it went. And then you have, well, the BitTorrent, which is an even subtler reflection in that BitTorrent essentially propagates itself with itself. Well, Jeff's software has a similar viral propagation capacity. Okay. And we think that we'll see some fast developments in the next 3 to 6 months.
Wow, that's really optimistic. Well, I actually have another question, which is the following. About 10 years ago, I was a very busy, business professional, working too hard, and I wanted to try out the LED system in Brussels, Belgium. And I can't quite remember all the details, but I just remember that for me it was, oh my God, this is a lot of work. So in other words, the mental transaction costs, to actually get it going, were such that I said, okay, no, with my job, no time,
quite.
I just want to earn and spend my money. I don't want to spend the time thinking about and finding people. You know what I mean?
But if you had a system in Brussels where your smart card carried the 10 currencies that you were using, your locality, your church, your neighborhood, your sports affiliation, your cultural group, maybe your musicians, so you got your musicians' money on there. You've got one smart card that carries a lot. And whenever you go into a restaurant or a theater or a retail store, it's got a little logo up and it says something like 30% local, these currencies. And it cites the 5 main currencies that are being used in Brussels at that time. If that was the thing and it was just you put your card down and the processing handled it and that was it, and that part of your salary, or if you're a business owner or something, part of your income was obviously in these monies, then there's no transaction cost that's in any way comparable to the transaction costs that we face with hard currency at the moment. You had experience with an immature, infantile system, probably utterly mismanaged. I'm saying that as a general guess. I don't know the systems you were trying to use in Brussels at that time, but our experience is that about 98% of the let system initiatives that have been created worldwide are not let systems, and they're not created with any really intelligent approach to the context they have to serve. They're little clubs for people with rather little ideas for the most part. It's regrettable, but it's the way that ideas percolate through a society. So you saw the immature. Question is, what's going to happen when you see a real one?
Right. So, I know some examples that, are not open money, but in China you have the QQ system.
Mm-hmm.
That is a kind of a mobile phone currency that has grown by leaps and bounds. And in Africa they're trading airtime minutes, right? Even seconds.
Yeah.
So those are examples that show that potentially these kind of monies can grow very fast.
Oh yes.
What would you propose to people like me? You're probably familiar with the kind of situation where a lot of people volunteer their time. A lot of what we do is immaterial, so people expect it to be free. And if I look at a network like the P2P Foundation or the Minnesota's laboratories, I know a few others.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of quickly discover that most people, they're almost like Christian martyrs. They follow their passion, but they're getting pauperized because the mainstream society doesn't recognize that kind of value. And I must admit it's a problem I'm struggling with. So what do you say to the P2P Foundation? What kind of what will you propose?
Well, at this point, the foundation is a couple of hundred people who, some of whom are heavily engaged, and others are basically lurking, following on.
Yes, it's the usual what I call the ladder of participation. 1% that does a lot. Then you have 10% that does, a little bit once in a while, and then you have 90% who just come and use it. And
well, if you were something like a community-supported agricultural project, the product of your efforts, the 1%, 2%, 3% who are doing most of it, would be willingly supported by the other 97%, because people need to eat, and if you're producing something and so on. The difficulty with an immaterial is that the free rider syndrome is alive and well. Like nobody has to put anything in. Michel will continue to do his work and get around the planet by his fingernails and his shoelaces, but he'll get around and carry on with it, and we'll all benefit. And that's probably the problem that you're facing until you get either a little bigger or a lot more serious. Either route is necessary. Where you stand at the moment, frankly, I think the focus of your organization, your community, and the immaterial nature of its product means that you're going to be, you're going to have difficulty eliciting the sort of support that is merited in the circumstances. Now, I don't think it's impossible, but if we went to every one of your 200 or so people and said, what proportion of your sort of annual economy would you be willing to allocate to the benefit of the P2P Foundation? Would you give 1% of your time and energy, or would you be able to support it with 10% of your energy? Or in some cases, would you be able to give 50% if the means were there? Once you find that you have enough people who are willing to say that they do 1%, and for some people that might be, okay, well, I'll pitch in, $500 because I'm a $50,000 a year person. Somebody might say, well, I'm only $20,000 a year, but I'll put in $200. Or they might say, I'll put in 4% and I'll put in $800 on my 200 or something. It's just, you need to build up an understanding of what people actually say they would contribute to your process. And from that basis, you've got an opportunity to look at it. I don't know how far you'll get, that becomes a question of just how are you valued inside that group. But there's no real difference between you and, say, a garage band in Seattle who's got a gig every 3 weeks and it has a dedicated fan club. What are their fans doing to support this protege band? Can they find a method of underwriting it, supporting it, showing up to the gigs, buying the beer, buying CDs? Same game. It's just that your music is of a different nature. So you're going to have to test your community to find out what they're willing to project as a support for your work. When you get that sort of a feel for the place, then you get into the place where you can start designing actual instruments that are compatible with the energy and your own needs. Oh, lost again. Dear me. I'm going to blame Thailand for this. Not. I'm sure it's the Olympics are doing it.
Well, we've only got 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so we'll just have to wrap it up and talk about doing some more.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. Michel, you're back. Sorry to have dropped you again.
I'm back. Yes, sorry.
The way the world seems to work. I wanted to just identify, as Ernie says, we've only got a couple of minutes. I put up a link to a conference in 4 or 5 weeks in Los Angeles by an anthropological group working with support from Intel. And the link to anthro.uci.edu/emoney is...
Yes, I see that.
You'll see in there that there's a lot of work happening on the edge of these digital currencies. And I'll be presenting there on the premise that I'm speaking to Intel, that we want Intel using community currencies and doing it soon and doing it substantially. And it's a challenge. It's what we call the black swan or bullshit. Black swans are these out of left field, here it comes, it's unpredictable. And most of our filtering mechanisms are designed around finding bullshit and rejecting it. And that's not a good mechanism for seeing the black swan, because you've got to appreciate something you didn't appreciate before. That's the only way you can see something that's new. Well, we're doing a black swan in this conference, and it's intended to shift the scale. So that's our upcoming agenda, and that's, as we get into that range and find out what sort of reactions we get from the academics and from the tech people or the anthropological people in Intel, it'll be interesting to see where we can go next. Ernie's suggesting that we have another conversation of this nature, perhaps next week at the same time, and continue on these points, maybe pick up on some more conversations if there's text on the Ning site. How would that appeal? Would you be willing to spend some more time with us on this? Oh, we dropped him again.
Oh,
once more.
Okay. Well, anyway. All right.
We'll sort that out by... Say goodbye, Ernie, and we'll sort out
goodbye,
this.
Ernie. Okay. That was Michael Linton talking with Michel Bauwens. And Bauwens. I should get that right. Anyway, and we dropped him a few times, and perhaps that's because of the fact that he's in Thailand and we're way on the other side of the planet. So anyway, that's it for Open Money tonight in Thailand, this morning in the Comox Valley, and hopefully we'll have another show next week, possibly around this time. So, and I've got another 57 seconds left. I guess if anybody is listening and wants to get in touch, I'm Ernie at openmoney.org. Michael is MWL at openmoney.org. Skype is Ernie Voice. And also you can find us on the web, Google Open Money, Let Systems, all one word, and letsystems.net, or lets.net. Sorry, it's lets.net.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Michel you can find on P2P And you can also find Michel all over the place with P2P. So I'm signing off, and we'll talk again next week.
Thank you. Thanks, Ernie. Bye now.